Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me post a link. I'm not going to invite anyone up until I'm done reviewing this article, but I'm still going to post a link so that you'll know that this is going to be an open discussion. Okay, so there's the link. Now, this is a very long article. I tried to highlight the portions that were relevant. To me, this was a very difficult read because I don't like reading articles where the author basically spends more time telling you what they're not saying. I'm not saying this and I'm not saying that, but they never actually get to the point. They never tell you what their actual argument is. So I really had to try to get through all of the fluff to see what the actual argument is. So I don't expect everyone to get through this because this is a very boring and monotonous article. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the cliff notes. Let me pull this article up. By the way, I posted this. Wait, where did it? I posted it in the description. So if you guys want to read the full article, it is on JSTOR. Um, I'll download the free article, the full article, but you can actually view it on JSTOR for free if you get an account. You can't download it, right? I downloaded it from a university, but you can still read it. Okay, so let's go back to the top. This is a Lockean argument for Black reparations. In case you don't know what Lockean refers to, that's John Locke, who was one of the founding fathers. Um, the author is Bernard R. Boxill. Okay. So, according to this author, John Locke, if he were alive today, would support a case for reparations for African Americans based on the enslavement of their slave ancestors. So, so I put a little quote from John Locke, but that wasn't the full quote because I couldn't fit it into the thumbnail. So, here's the full quote. In his second treatise of government, John Locke wrote, "Besides the crime which consists in violating the law and varying from the right rule of reason, there is commonly injury done to some person or some other man receives damage by his transgression, in which case he hath received any damage, has beside the right of punishment common to him with other men a particular right to seek reparation from him that has done it." All right, so y'all keep this in mind because a lot of people will say, "Well, I didn't do it." A lot of people will say that they're immigrants; they had nothing to do with slavery. So that's basically the parameters that we're working with. The right of reparation, law continues in the next session, belongs only to the injured party, so that while the magistrate who has the common right of punishing put into his hands can often, where the public good demands not the execution of the law, remit the punishment of criminal offenses by his own authority, but cannot remit the satisfaction due to any private man for the damage he has received, that he who has suffered the damage has a right to demand in his own name, and he alone can remit. The damnified person has the power of appropriating to himself goods or services of the offender by right of self-preservation. Okay, so I told you I was going to give y'all the cliff notes because again, I don't think that some of you are going to listen to all this. But basically, um, where's the summary in this? He basically lays out like, two different cases. One for basically saying that the states and the federal government had a role in it, and so basically, we're not seeking damages from individuals. We're seeking damages from the government. Um, and that was basically the conclusion that he reached because he made a counterfactual argument. Um, okay, just to get to the point, basically what he said is that it's not based just on slavery itself. We're not trying to blame and hold people liable for slavery when they had nothing to do with it. But it was the fact that the state and federal government prevented the black community from repairing itself after slavery. So we have this whole system of Jim Crow. We have Black Wall Street being destroyed, and the federal and state government all had an active role in preventing black people from pulling themselves by their bootstraps. So I'm just getting to the chase, y'all, but I'm still going to go through it piece by piece because he lays out a whole bunch of stuff that addresses arguments that people put forth. So I think that this has a lot of value. Is there anybody? Okay, we have one person here. Let's go back to it. Okay, so here's the argument that he lays out. Taking T to be the transgressor and V the one he harms or damages, the key point seems to be as follows. If T commits a transgression and V is harmed as a result, V has a right to seek reparation from T. If T harms V without committing a transgression or commits a transgression but without harming V, V does not have a right for reparation from T. To have a right to seek reparation from T, T must have committed a transgression and V must receive damage from T's transgression. But it is apparently not necessary that T intended to transgress B or intended to cause damage to B. It is enough that T transgressed against someone and as a result, B receives damage. So, T, again, we're not talking about punishing all white people collectively. We're talking about the federal and the state government. And to the extent that we can identify those who actually own slaves, then those people should be they should be held liable also. By the way, before I even get started, let me just tell y'all the elements of negligence because this is what this is essentially saying. So, in order to have a case for negligence, you have to have a duty, a breach, causation, and damages. So, the government had a duty to protect the slaves and the descendants of slaves under Jim Crow. They breached that duty and abdicated it by actively denying blacks equal rights. As a result of their breach, blacks suffered damages. They were denied opportunities. They were forced to do unpaid labor or underpaid labor. And as a result, the black community has suffered damages. Now, he's going to get into the inheritance argument because a lot of people will say, well, slavery was 160 years ago. Get over it. No, you have a right to inherit. So just like anybody else would inherit, you would inherit property from your ancestors. Black people have that same right, especially when other people profited from unpaid and stolen labor. So reparation is not the same as punishment. Punishment is to deter the wrongdoer and warn others. Reparation is to make satisfaction for the harm that V suffered. In some cases, it is impossible to make satisfaction to V for the harm that he suffered. In these cases, reparation is impossible. An example involves murder. A murder man's family can perhaps receive reparation for the loss they suffer as a result of this death, but he cannot receive reparation for his death. As Locke says, no reparation can compensate for murder. This suggests that reparation must compensate the injured party for his harms. Um, well, there are I mean, there are cases for not for murder itself, but for loss of what is it called? I forget. Gosh, why am I having a brain fog? But there basically is a civil equivalence to murder, wrongful death, um, loss of consortium, things like that. So if this was your husband who got murdered, you would have a claim for loss of consortium, wrongful death that survives the family, right? Even after the person is deceased, the family can still have a cause of action for wrongful death. So this suggests that reparation must compensate the injured party for his harms, but reparation and compensation are not therefore the same thing. A person can be compensated for any harm he suffers from, including a harm that is not the result of others' transgression, and he can be compensated by those who had nothing to do with his being harmed. But he can receive reparation only for harms that he suffers as a result of others' transgression, and he can receive it only from those whose transgression harmed him. Consequently, is if a transgressor harms me and an innocent does what he can to help defray the cost of compensating me for my harms, it does not follow that I may receive reparations. I am still entitled to seek it from the only one who can give it, that is from the transgressor, though what this involves may be affected by the fact that someone has done what she can to compensate me. Okay, so the state and national government, federal government never did any, they never made any effort to compensate those slaves, right? They just let time pass by. We're supposed to just forget it. We're just supposed to pull ourselves from our bootstraps, get over it. Meanwhile, this entire country was built on the backs of slaves, unpaid stolen labor. Um, this wealth, the wealth of America basically came from stolen land from the Native Americans and free labor. So I would say if we're stakeholders, right? Black people have I'm not talking about all black people, by the way. We're not talking about these Johnny come latelys came later. By the way, for those of you who are not familiar, the terms that we use in the black community are ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, and what's the other one? The other one is Foundational Black Americans. The more common one is ADOS. That's what the ones that Foundational Black Americans, that came way later by Tariq Nasheed trying to basically hijack something that had already been established in order to put his own stamp on it. By the way, y'all, I know this isn't relevant, but my brother just sent me this information that Tariq used to be a pimp, and this is supposed to be a leader for the black community. And he's making these documentaries about reparations, and he's making all this money off of it. So be careful about these race hustlers who don't have the black interests, the black community's interests in mind. Just trying to make money off of the suffering of black. Okay, we have it going on in the black community, right? We have our race hustlers, but it happens in other communities too. The Jewish community also has race hustlers who are trying to profit off the suffering of Jews. So I mean, I think that our experience is very similar. You can sit up here and fall for the trap, right? You're getting exploited by these people who are trying to make money off the suffering of your ancestors. Meanwhile, they don't give a damn about the black community. Okay, let's see if I have any comments. I agree with all you were saying, but go tell them FBA fools arguing about black foreigners will not get us. Well, yeah, I think it's stupid. At the end of the day, maybe they're not entitled to reparations. I don't know why they sit up there and argue with these people, with these black immigrants, right? Clearly, they weren't descendants of slaves, so they don't have a stake in this. Um, I think it's mainly because you have people who are black basically telling us to pull ourselves by our bootstraps. But I think it goes further than that because you listen to someone like Tariq Nasheed, he's basically calling them dirty, saying that they're low skilled workers. Um, Even though some of these people are actually attorneys, doctors, there a lot of them are doing better than foundational black Americans, as he would say. I don't know what it is. At the end of the day, we need to, aside from reparations, they have nothing to do with that. They weren't descendants of slaves, but at the end of the day, these are still black people and they're still part of the black community. So um when you look at this, a lot of the problems that we face are global. So I don't know why they're trying to kick these black immigrants out, but it's a complete waste of time. I think it's a distraction. I think it's a non sequitur. We don't. I don't have an issue with black immigrants. I think what it is that these black immigrants are holding black men accountable, basically telling them that you're the man, you're responsible for raising your family. Stop making these damn excuses, right? Um, yeah, like especially Africans, they take pride in raising their families and being the head of the household and being providers. But so a lot of black Americans don't like to hear that shit, but it is what it is. Um, a lot of people think that I'm African, especially Africans themselves. They think that I'm from Nigeria or whatever. I do have Nigerian blood, but I don't have a problem with foreign black people. I get along with them most of the time. If T commits a transgression and V is harmed as a result, V is entitled to seek reparation from T. It is unnecessary and irrelevant that T gets any profit or satisfaction from his transgression or from harming V. T could have been harmed as a result of his own transgression and from harming V, and his harms could be greater than V's harm. V is still entitled to seek reparation from him. If I punch you and break your jaw, I am not let off the hook because I also broke your hand more severely than I broke your jaw. If T makes a profit from his transgression from harming V, V is not automatically entitled to that profit as his reparation. His reparation depends strictly on how much T harmed him, not on how much profit he made from harming him. I don't know if I agree with that. Now, he does talk about compounded interest from the unpaid labor, but if you make a profit, okay, I see what he's saying. He's going by the strict definition of what reparation actually entails. Um, that the whole goal of reparations is to repair. So the fact that someone profited from it is not relevant according to this author. Um, I think it is relevant. I think it's relevant to the extent that it goes to okay. I just told y'all the definition of what negligence is. Is a duty, a breach, causation, and damages. The reason that is relevant is because it speaks to the person's ability to pay those damages. So if they profited from unpaid paid labor and they were able to start build institutions and accumulate all this wealth off of unpaid labor, then that goes to their ability to compensate you. That goes to the damages. Um, and it's well, okay, it's not just reparations. I would say it's also unjust enrichment, which is also a cause of action under common law. So we need to add the language matters. We keep talking about reparations, but it's also unjust enrichment. I wasn't really prepared to talk about unjust enrichment, so I don't have notes on that. But basically, when someone provides you free labor, um, it's not a cause of action. It's not like a legal tort. It's a common law thing. Unjust enrichment means that it's con- anyway. I don't want to get too deep into the legal stuff because it's kind of boring. But yeah, it's like if I have a contract and let's say we don't have a written contract, right? But you basically asked me to paint your house, and then after I painted your house, you decided not to pay me. Although we don't have a formal contract, you have unjustly been enriched by my labor, and so it's a quasi contract that you are entitled to seek damages. So a contract is law, and then a quasi contract is equitable. Is so I don't know if y'all understand the difference. There's a difference between law and equity. Law is what's written in black and white, and then equity is just what is a fair outcome. Okay, so on Locke's account, the slaves were clearly entitled to seek reparation from the slaveholders for the slaveholders committed serious transgressions that harmed the slaves. But how do we get from these propositions to proposition at issue? Namely, that present day African Americans have a claim for reparation based on the enslavement of their ancestors. Locke's account does not automatically rule out the proposition because slavery ended 150 years ago. Well, this was 10 years ago. Now we're at 160 years, and the slaves have long since died. His account not say that people damaged as a result of others' transgression can seek reparation only if the transgressions occurred immediately before they were damaged. It allows that they can seek reparation for damages even if the transgressions that caused the damages occurred much earlier. Consequently, if slavery's transgressions have harmed present day African Americans, they may be entitled to seek reparation for their harms, even if slavery ended a long time ago. But from whom can they seek reparations? Okay, let me go back to see if there are any. Most Black Americans don't even care about reparations. Well, most Black people, and I hate to say this, but most Black people are extremely ignorant, almost to the level of a slave-esque ignorance. Like, even when if I talk about politics, it's like someone saying, "Who the hell are you to talk about Cornel West?" Like, what? They give deference to celebrities and public figures, and they're basically not intellectuals. A lot of them are Christian. They sit around praying. They don't use their intellect at all. So no, and they're going to be told that they should just get over it and they should um just pull themselves by the bootstraps. And a lot of them will fall for it. This is the reason why a lot of like Tariq Nasheed has a problem with these black immigrants because they're going to be the ones telling you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But even the ones who are descendants of slaves, they're just too ignorant to even have an opinion. They're not thinkers. They're basically just worker bees. They go to work. They have no concept of society as a whole, how things are structured, how we got to this point where we are. They're not even a part of a collective or a community. They're just individuals trying to basically stab each other in the back, right? They're going to thwart your efforts to pull yourself up because even when you try to pull yourself up, you're going to your biggest attractors are going to be people within your own community, right? They're going to be jealous of you, the fact that you have a nice car, the fact that your house is bigger, the fact that you're not begging for money, you're self-sufficient. They're going to try to pull you down. It's really unfortunate. This is the reason why a lot of black people, when they get wealth, they immediately move out of the black community because when you live in a black community, you're going to be constantly torn down. I can't count the number of times that have people begging for money, right? People come ringing my doorbell in the middle of the night begging for shit and I don't even answer it. But if I have mail come, they steal it. um it's like I'm trying to get myself to the next level, but I can't because it's all this dead weight. Everybody thinks that because it's like I had to struggle to get this house, to get approved for this house. This was a long thing. It wasn't something that was handed to me. I had to rebuild my credit and do all this stuff. And for somebody to just come and try to tear up my property because they're jealous, who wants to deal with that shit? That's why so many black people are moving out of black communities. Thank you for that comment. The first reparation was 40 acres and a mule, but I've been told free schooling and freedom is enough. No, I don't think it is enough because at the end of the day, there is no black ownership. So at the end of the day, no matter what, you're still going to be dependent on the system. This is the reason why so many black people are afraid to speak out against the Israeli occupation or other issues, right? When you talk about history and how we got to this point, a lot of black people are afraid to speak up because they don't own shit. So you can easily be canceled. You can easily be turned into a pillar of salt if you say the wrong thing. So um we're never going to be free, right? This is the right to self-determination is essential. We don't have the right to self-determination when we're dependent upon other people for our own survival. Okay. Consequently, if slavery harmed present-day African Americans, they are entitled to seek reparation from the person whose transgression resulted in their harm, that is, from the slave owner. I already read that part. One possible solution is one possible solution to this difficulty is to argue that the U.S. and federal government help support slavery and consequently are implicated in its transgression. Since the government continue to exist, present-day African Americans may be entitled to seek reparation from them. As I have already indicated, it may not matter that the transgression in question ended 150 years ago. What matters is that they have harmed present day African Americans. Several steps in this argument are controversial. Probably the most controversial is that slavery has harmed present day African Americans. African Americans suffer from many disabilities. This is not talking about physical disability. This is basically talking about legal and societal disabilities. These are limitations that are put on you based on the fact that you are black and you are a descendant of slaves, the fact that you have not had access to wealth, and the fact that you don't own anything. We have to show that slavery caused them. The fact that slavery ended 150 years ago does not matter after all. This argument has to be rebutted to make the point that black disabilities stem from slavery. More generally, if slavery did not initiate a chain of causality, leak harms, one has to show that blacks have not helped to keep that chain unbroken. Um, I don't know. I think when you keep people ignorant, when we don't even have control over our own education system, right? We have black people who are barely literate, who can't do basic math, and they're able to graduate high school. They have no prospects of any type of meaningful future. And then this is compounded by the fact that they just continue to pump out babies. So their children are not going to have any future. And this is the whole cycle. This is broken, but at the same, it's like, when did they ever? I know people want to say that this happened so long ago. I have family in South Carolina when I visited, and this is probably like 20 years ago. Um, they were basically living in slave shacks, right? They had very broken English. They almost lived like slaves or something. Like they didn't have any intelligence whatsoever. These were the most backwards people ever. They didn't have running. I'm not talking about all of my family. Just like, you know, some like third cousins who I never met before. They didn't have running water. They basically just went to the lake to fish, and um they were running around barefoot. A lot of people don't even know that these people exist. You go to South Carolina, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So even if slavery did harm the slave, which of course it did, it does not follow that it is the cause of present day black disabilities. Black themselves may be the cause of these disabilities, even if they could have avoided passing on their disabilities to their children, but did not. A further difficulty follows from the fact that reparation requires compensation. Now, I have my own thoughts about the whole compensation aspect of it. Um, I'm going to save that later. I'm basically just going to stick to this article, and then after I'm done with it, I'm going to give commentary, and then I'm going to open it up for discussion. It goes as follows: the slaves were entitled to seek reparation from the U.S. government for its part in their enslavement, but they were never given that reparation. But present-day African Americans are their slaves' heirs. Consequently, supposing they have inherited rights to whatever their slave ancestors were entitled to, it follows that they have rights to the reparation that the government owed its slave ancestors but were never paid. This argument does not say that paying the present day US black population the reparation that was owed to their ancestors will compensate their ancestors. The ancestors of the present day black population are dead, and no compensation can make reparation for the harms they suffered. But it does not follow that their rights to reparation evaporated into nothing when they died. When people die, their rights to their property, for example, are passed to their heirs. It is not necessary that the property be in their possession. For example, a person's debtors are not let off the hook just because he dies. The debts they owed are now owed to his heirs, but the U.S. government was among the debtors of the slaves, and it never paid them. The debt it owed them. Consequently, it owes that debt with interest to their heirs to the heirs of the slaves, and the heirs of the slaves are their descendants. That is the present day black population. Because of its reliance on the right of inheritance, let us call this argument the inheritance argument for black reparation. Let's go back and see if there are any comments. Well, they will say they fought for others to come here to America. Well, this is the whole thing. They use that whole 14th Amendment argument to apply to everyone except black people. So they use that 14th Amendment um, for immigrants, right? So um, yeah, that the 14th Amendment was supposed to only apply to blacks. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, but now it's like everyone gets to benefit from the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was supposed to give equal rights to the descendants of slaves. Now it's about women and gays and immigrants and this whole thing of substantive due process, which basically was overturned with the Dobbs decision when they overturned Roe v. Wade. So the new conservative Supreme Court is basically trying to do away with these 14th Amendment um I don't know, hijackers, or what's the better term, piggybackers of black suffering. So let's go to next. I've heard black people on YouTube say they don't care about the Gaza mess because it's not our fight. Well, I don't know. I think that we should basically care about our own survival, right? Our own self-preservation, because at the end of the day, there are plenty. I just did a whole live stream about that. There are plenty of Arabs who have money, who have billions and trillions of dollars, and they're not doing a damn thing to help these people. So I don't think that black people should stick their necks out for these people, especially when they come into our communities building businesses, and then they treat us like crap, and they don't do anything to help us. When they get opportunities, when they become wealthy, none of these people hire blacks. So um, I do feel sorry for them, and I do think that what Israel is doing is wrong. But I think there are other people who are in a better position to speak on their behalf. I live in Houston, Texas, born and raised. My family and grandma is from Alabama. I was saying FBA fools would tell black foreigners they fought for them to come to America. Oh, I don't know. They fought for them to come to America. I think that they benefited from the immigration reform that was general to everyone. I don't think that black people had a special role in fighting for the rights of immigrants. I think that the black experience is unique, and everyone has benefited from it, including immigrants. So, like I said, that 14th Amendment was for the descendants of slaves. It was not supposed to be about immigrants. So, I don't think that black people actively fought for immigrants. That I don't think that has ever occurred. Now, what I will say with this pork barrel legislation, when they came up with this civil rights legislation, they did tack on immigration, but that was tangential. That wasn't something that black people actively fought for. Okay. Um, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get. I may have to skip through this because we're only okay. The counterfactual argument concludes that present-day African Americans have a claim for reparation based on enslavement of their ancestors, but it relies crucially on the controversial premise that slavery has harmed the present-day generation of black people. It did so, the argument says, by initiating a chain of harms related as cause and effect befalling the slaves and their descendants that has persisted to present day. These causal claims were the source of the argument's weakness. They bogged it down in controversial claims that slavery continues to have harmful effects in a full century and a half after its abolition. The inherent argument sidesteps these difficulties. It insists that the U.S. government supported slavery, that slavery was unjust and harmed the slaves, and consequently that the slaves had rights to reparation from the U.S. government. But it studiously avoids relying on the assumption that slavery has harmed the present day Black population. It would be unaffected, for example, by the chains of harm that slavery initiated had somehow been broken, and consequently that slavery had left no deadly legacy of harms that continue to incapacitate the present day Black population. So this is what they always say. They say, we have Oprah, we have Obama, get over it, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But it's like, no. When you use the inheritance argument, then you don't even have to deal with it. You don't have to say that present day Black people are still harmed by slaves. It's that we are still entitled to the unpaid stolen labor that our ancestors provided in building this country. Someone must have been harmed in order, I mean, someone must have been harmed to be entitled to reparation. So that if at some point slavery no longer harmed the slaves' descendants, from that point they would cease being entitled to reparation for being harmed by slavery. The inheritance argument, however, would be unaffected if slavery's long reach and had ended some time ago and it no longer harmed the Black population. It relies on the assumption that the US government owes the present Black population a debt for an unjust loss that it helped to cause, and such a debt is not revoked just because the creditor has recovered from the loss and is prosperous. Of course, the present day Black population is not prosperous. Indeed, it suffers from many disabilities. But the argument does not rely on this fact. So you use the inheritance arguments instead of saying that, oh, well, you were harmed by um, slaves, right? That's the part that many people can't get past. It's like slavery happened so long ago. How can you, who were never enslaved, whine about slavery? No, this was unjust enrichment. This country was built off of stolen labor. So those slaves were never paid for their labor. Therefore, their descendants are entitled to compensation for that labor with interest. And let's see if there are any more comments. Yeah, I wish there were more people here because so many people have asked me to talk about reparations, but none of these people are here. Hopefully, they'll see. A lot of people want to talk about stuff this as a, just to get things off their chest, just to whine. But when it comes to an intellectual discussion, then they're nowhere to be found because you'll have people sitting up here talking about it. But when it comes to actual solutions and actually presenting the argument of what is the best case for reparations, I put a lot of thought into this and I researched several articles. I chose this article out of many. Um, and I felt that this was the best article, which really encapsulates the issue, the core issue. So, um, where are those people? Hopefully, they'll show up by the time I'm done with this article because I did post a link. Let me see. I'm going to post it again. Hopefully, people will have something to say about it other than to sit up and complain. The inheritance argument does not say that African Americans have a claim for reparation based on the enslavement of their ancestors. It says they have a claim to collect the compensation that was owed to their ancestors but was never paid. There are differences concerning the amount of there are differences concerning how the amount of compensation should be calculated. One possibility is that the slaves' claim for reparation could be based on the fact that they owe what they produce, or they own, excuse me, what they produce, which the slave owners stole. Let me start over from. Let me read the whole thing. One possibility is that the slaves' claim for reparation could be based on the fact that they own what they produce, which the slave holders stole and bequeathed to their children. On that account, the descendants of the slaves could claim reparations that the property of their ancestors be returned to them with interest. Okay, so that's one argument. We have duties that we do not take on deliberately. and are unaware that we have. If such duties are required by natural law, the U.S. government at the time of slavery was complicit in the crime of slavery and therefore had a duty required by natural law to make reparation to the slaves. It does not matter that the government ignored this duty and denied and was unaware that it had a duty. It was sufficient that the government assisted the owners, the slaveholders, and did so culpably. So we're not talking about holding all white people accountable. We're talking about the federal and state governments. They all participated in the enslavement of black people. They all participated in stolen labor. So, like I told y'all, the elements of negligence, a duty breach contract, a duty breach, causation and damages. The government had a duty to protect the slaves, and it breached that duty by failing to protect us, and instead they decided to protect the slaveholders. So the federal and state governments all had a role in this, and they owe us reparations. On top of that, they actually receive tax revenue off of stolen slave labor. So I don't know. I would say that at very least, maybe we should get some stock in the federal and state governments. We should we whatever revenue, because at the end of the day, these governments are corporations. Maybe we should get some stock in it so that when they profit, we should be able to profit too. We should have a stake in this country since our ancestors built it. I need not balk at the U.S. making reparation to its Japanese citizens or government making reparations, or excuse me, or Germany making reparations to the Jews. By the way, the U.S. government also makes reparations to Israel, so it's not just Germany. These cases do not involve making people for reparations for crimes committed 150 years before they were born. It is more likely that those required to pay the debts of reparation participated in the injustice that caused those debts, or they did not. It is not unlikely that they inherited enough to pay the debts without violations of their freedom. Um, yeah, he's trying to make a I feel like there was a lot of back and forth in this article because at the end of the day, he does make this applicable to present day descendants of slaves because he basically tied it to Jim Crow and systemic discrimination. So it's not just slavery, it's also the fact that the government conspired to prevent black people from picking ourselves up by our bootstraps. According to Locke, such a conqueror gets no power, but only over those who have actually assisted, concurred, or consented to that unjust force that is used against him. This power, Locke continues, is perfectly despoticable. As Locke goes on to make clear, the lawful conqueror has a right to reparation against those who unjustly opposed him for the damages they caused him, though that right is significantly qualified. The right of conquest, Locke claims, extends only to the lives of those who joined in the war, not to their estates, but only in order to make reparation for the damages received and the charges of the war, and that too with reservation of the right of the innocent wife and children. Here then is the case: the conqueror has a title to reparations for damages received, and the children have a title to their father's estate for their subsistence. What must be done in this case? I answer, the fundamental law of nature being that all as much may be should be preserved. It follows that if there were not enough fully to satisfy both these, the conqueror's losses, the children's maintenance, he that have and to spare must remit something for his full satisfaction and must give way to the pressing and preferable title of those who are in danger to perish without it. So basically, what he's saying is that although those who are harmed by the transgressor are entitled to reparations, um, if those uh, successors can't give reparations without harming themselves, without compromising the survival of their own children, then basically giving reparations would be an undue burden. Okay, let's go back and see if there are any comments. I watch videos on YouTube and there are uploaded to posted videos from TikTok where Black people made responses to other races about us, but in reality, they could care less. Um, okay, so I guess you're saying that Black people care more about other people's communities more than they care about their own community. That's yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. But at the end of the day, they're ignorant, so they don't know anything. And I think that they are kept ignorant purposefully. But at the same time, if you're ignorant, that's also your responsibility. You actually have to have a desire to seek knowledge, and a lot of Black people don't seek knowledge. They're anti-intellectual. All they want to do is sit around praying, and they seek entertainment. They seek pleasure. They're hedonistic. So instead of cracking open a book, they're not going to, even right now, they're not going to listen to his live stream. This is boring. They don't want to learn anything. They just want to be ignorant and then defer to someone else to solve all their problems. Locke's contention suggests how to defend the inheritance argument without requiring anyone to pay damages caused by transgressions he did not commit or consent to. Here is an outline of how this defense proceeds. It starts with the uncontroversial fact that the owners, excuse me, it starts with the uncontroversial fact that the slaveholders harmed the slaves. From this fact, it follows, still controversially, that the slaves had titles to reparation from some portion of the estate of the slaveholders. And from Locke's claim in section 179 and 180 of the Second Treatise of Government, as noted above, it seems true that the slaves had titles to reparation for some portion of the estates of those who assisted, concurred, or consented to the slaveholders' transgression. Further, from section 183, it follows that the slaves had title to reparation for some portion of the estate of both these classes of people if the slaveholders, as well as those who assisted, concurred or consented to their transgression against the slaves, even if they passed their estates on to their heirs, with the important qualification that the slaves were not entitled to press these titles if doing so would endanger the lives of their heirs. Remember what I just talked about, how basically you're entitled to reparations to the extent that it's not going to compromise the survival of the heirs. So even though the transgressors had a duty to pay reparations, if their children can't survive paying those reparations, then that's basically going to undercut the whole argument. So assume finally the present day white US citizens are the heirs of the slaveholders and those who assisted, concurred, or consented to their transgression, and that present day African Americans are the heirs of the slaves. In that case, it would seem that present day African Americans have titles to part of the estate white U.S. citizens have inherited from the holders, and those who assisted, concurred, or consented to their transgressions. Now let's look at the details of this argument. It will be readily conceded, I hope, at least some white U.S. citizens have inherited assets from slaveholders. In its first premise is that the U.S. federal and state governments committed a grave injustice when it helped the slaveholders to maintain slavery. This is something people don't want to acknowledge. They always want to talk about how we're trying to take property or we're just trying to get a windfall. This is not a windfall. This is unpaid labor that the U.S. and state governments actually profited from. A reasonable suggestion is that a people's failure to express dissent from their government's unjust acts gives tacit consent to these acts. Since consent has to be given knowingly and voluntarily, this is only true if the government does not punish dissent to its injustice or conceals that justice or deceive the public about it. If a government punishes expressions of dissent to its injustice, it compels citizens to not express this dissent to its injustice. That is, it compels them to give a sign of tacit consent to that injustice, but signs of consent, tacit or express, do not give consent when they are made under compulsion. Since dissent from the government support of slavery was not punished, but happened only rarely, it follows that most whites consented to their government's injustice to the slaves. But according to Locke, citizens who assisted, concurred, or consented to a government's injustice must help make reparation for the damage to its unjust causes. Consequently, the slaves had titles to reparation against the estates of practically the entire white population. Now, I do want to give qualification for this because back in the day, um, all whites did not have the right to vote. Only white males who owned property had the right to vote. So if you were a poor white person, you probably did not have the you did not have a voice to dissent from slavery. Um, but I don't know. At the end of the day, there was something called legal coverture. So if a man was married to a woman, he basically spoke for the entire household and also for the children. So even though that white man only he had the right to vote, legal coverture means that his voice basically covered their entire family. Okay, where did I? This reparation was never paid. Instead, each white generation passed on its entire assets to the next white generation. The whole of each generation of whites passed on its assets to the whole of the next white generation because each generation of whites specified that only whites of the succeeding generation were permitted to own or compete for the assets it was leaving behind. Only white men could own property. Actually, that's not completely true. White women could own property, but the only property they could own were slaves. So, a lot of women back then they had dowers where men would actually inherit property from their wives. A lot of times, the wives had more wealth than the husbands, but the only property that white women could own were slaves. So white women would try to accumulate as many slaves as possible because that was the only thing that they could own. And even when white women got divorces, um, the slaves were considered her own property. That wasn't considered marital property. If she came in with slaves, if she got a divorce, that husband could not take her slaves because that was her only wealth that would allow her to survive. Okay, let's go back. Oh, I appreciate it. Well, you know what? I'm not going to I wish I could be more honest. There's some if we didn't have censorship, we wouldn't have this cancel culture, I would say a whole lot more. So I do feel that I'm holding back, but I'm trying to at least give y'all enough information to point you in the right direction. Yeah, it does take work. But people need to know the truth. But so many people are ignorant. Um, they don't even know up from down. So God, and black people don't even know how to choose the right leaders. That's why they keep falling for these race hustlers like Tariq Nasheed and Umar Johnson. Sit up there taking all their money and they're not doing shit to help the black community. So, I mean, I don't know if you can blame the black community because they're too ignorant to even be responsible. It's almost like they're childlike. They're just so gullible and so slavish that how can you blame them? They're like children. And I know this sounds terrible, but it is what it is. Um, if you're sitting around, even the Bible says that you need to be childlike. So if you're a Christian and you sit around praying, you are childlike. You are not an intellectual. I don't think that you can be held accountable because you're too ignorant. You're basically no, you're just one step above being a damn slave. I love my Black American history and all what we have done for our country, but using past tense talking points would not help today like most do. They will say, "Put it in God's hand, is His world." Yeah, yeah, put everything in God's hand. To sit around praying, just like a bunch of dumb slaves. And I'm not saying this to be, you know, crass or callous. I'm saying this because we need to do better. This is the reason why we're in the state we're in, because black people have not learned to elevate themselves, how to pull themselves up, how to even challenge the status quo. All they're going to do is pray and continue voting for the Democrats. And it's like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Okay. The inheritance argument presented here is certain to be misunderstood and misrepresented unless some of its steps are restated and emphasized. First, it maintains that the slaves had title to reparation against the assets of the entire white population, not just against the slaveholders. Remember, the reason that he's saying that the descendants of slaves had a claim against the entire white population is because the white population consented to slavery and they did not express dissent in mass. Now, I will say that the Quakers are a minority. The Quakers did express dissent. They didn't participate in it. The Quakers are probably the only exception that I can think of. They basically they were at the Quakers were the abolitionists. They helped to free slaves. As I have argued, this is because most whites consented to the government's support for slavery and consequently entitled the slaves to seek reparation from them. This reparation was never paid, but instead inherited by the next white generation. The slaves had title to reparation not only from the holders. The slaves had titles to reparation not only against the slaveholders, but against practically the entire generations that consented to slavery, even if their wealth owed nothing to slavery. Remember its premise. The transgressor can be compelled to make reparation from his crime, even if he made no profit from it, and even if making reparation put him in danger of perishing. God, this is a complete contradiction because he just said that you don't have a duty to make reparation if it's going to harm your children. Now he's saying that you have a duty to make reparation even if it puts you in danger of perishing. Guys, this article was all over the place, and this is one of the best ones that I could find. I scoured through several articles, and the reason why I chose it is because it was based on John Locke. It's based on natural laws. So I felt this was the most compelling, but at the same time, it was poorly written. Maybe I could have pulled some of this out and not read all of it, but he's all over the place. The most radical way to defend the limitation on the right of inheritance is to argue the right to property is not a natural right, but a conventional right that we design to secure our justice and well-being. An exception may be following Jean-Jacques Rousseau for the right of subsistence, but aside, it is arguable that our system of property rights and its various rights of inheritance are conventional. So here he goes talking about the property rights basically having to give way to the right of subsistence. This is what he's talking about. He's going back and forth. First, he says that you don't have a right to seek reparation if it's going to harm your children. Then he says you do have a duty to pay reparations even if it does harm your children. Now he's back to saying that the exception is if it's going to hinder your right to subsistence. This is terrible. It's almost like it's so disjointed. It's almost like he wrote this in sections without actually considering how it would all come together. Indeed, the limitation on the right of inheritance is an elaboration and perhaps an amplification of Locke's argument in section 183 that a child's right to inherit his father's estate is limited by the right to reparation of his father's victim. These people have a right to take from enough of the child's inheritance to make reparation of the damages of his father's injustice caused them. That is, the child's right to inherit his father's goods is limited by their right to seek reparation from his father. Also, of course, Locke emphasizes the right to seek reparation from the child's father is limited by the child's right of subsistence. I don't know about that. If the child was unjustly, what is that term? There's a legal term for that. A bon there's several of them. A bona fide sister, and there's another one in common law. I can't remember what is called. Um, yeah, it's basically equitable doctrines. They're not legal doctrines. That if you took property without knowing that it was wrongfully acquired, um, then basically you get to keep it. But now he's talking about taking from children. How did we get to children when he originally started talking about the national and state government profiting from stolen labor? The U.S. could have made reparation and suffered mild discomfort at worst. So this is not about subsistence. This is about greed. They could have paid reparations a long time ago, but they keep making these excuses. They keep passing the buck from generation to generation, mainly because they were never forced to pay reparations. So they're going to let time lapse. So now we're at 160 years. Um, Eventually it's going to be 200 years, 300, 400 years, and they're going to be saying, oh, it was so long ago, we don't have to pay reparations. And then at some point there really isn't going to be an American descendant of slavery populace, because we're going to be so mixed racially that basically the descendants of slaves will no longer exist. So then they don't have to pay reparations. They're going to be let off the hook. By society, Locke meant the community individuals make when they consent to form one body for their comfortable, safe, and peaceable living, and thereby obligate themselves to submit to the determination of the majority and be concluded by it. Supposing the majority of a society determine that certain individuals are its government, it follows that they are its legitimate government. So at the time, the government was comprised of white male property owners. That was the legitimate government at the time. The maximum that all legitimate government is government by consent still holds true, because by consenting to be a member of the society, its members obligate themselves to submit to the determination of the majority of the society. We live under a Republican form of government. So the majority is not a pure democracy, but we put officials in power to represent the will of the majority. So um, these are the people that they put in power to basically continue slavery. They supported it. Um, the Republicans were the ones to actually go against slavery. I know they want to try to tout that as a case against Democrats, but there was a realignment in the 1960s where basically um, the Republicans used to Republicans used to be the Liberal Party, and then in the 1960s, because of the Civil Rights Act, there was a realignment where the Republicans became conservative and the Democrats became liberal. The counterfactual argument. Okay, so we're getting close to the end. Harms allegedly traceable to slavery persist in the present black, excuse me, harms allegedly traceable to slavery persist in the black population. We speak, for example, the legacy of slavery, but so many vast political and economic changes have occurred since U.S. slavery ended 150 years ago that it makes sense to ask whether some of them have something to do with, or even perhaps are the real causes of the alleged legacy of slavery. Let's go back and see if there are any comments. I'm telling you what I heard and still hearing today. Them black Hebrew Israelites will use the Bible verses to say Yah cursed us because we broke his commandments. Yeah, the black Hebrew Israelites, even if you say that the original Jews were black, they were still black people from a specific reason. The word Jew, okay, so it was originally spelled Ju, meaning Judea, and then it was spelled Joo, and now it's spelled Jew. It still means somebody from Judea. So you would have to be from Judea in order to be Jewish. And these Hebrew Israelites are not saying that they are from Judea. They're just basically saying that all black people are the original Jews. Um, and there was a documentary on Netflix which was absolutely horrible. Though Hebrew, just because you say that, okay, the original Jews had dark skin and hair that was the texture of wool, that doesn't mean that all black people were Jews. Like, I mean, the lack of deductive reasoning, it's not logical what they're saying. I mean, and I'm not saying that the ones who are, Caucasian are the real Jews. I'm saying that the original Jews were black, but that doesn't mean that they were the Hebrew Israelites. Just because they were black, that doesn't mean that that's you. That doesn't mean that you are from Judea. Guys, these Hebrew Israelites are just not intellectual. They don't even know how to interpret the Old Testament. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. And by the way, let me go ahead and post that link again, because I'm going to, if anybody wants to join, we can have a discussion, because I have my own thoughts, but I'm not going to give my thoughts until I'm done with this article. The real reason why blacks should be absolved from blame is that the U.S. government did not merely fail to compensate the former slaves, but continued to persecute them after they were freed. Indeed, adding injury to injury, it prevented them from even competing for opportunities that were already owed to them as compensation, and which therefore should simply have been turned over to them. This double injustice, with its result through succeeding generations, makes a powerful case for claiming that if the slaveholders and their federal and state governments harmed the slaves, the white generations after emancipation have caused these harms to persist. That is, have caused them to be passed from the slaves to their descendants. In short, if slavery put blacks on the campus, later whites made sure they stayed there. So this is okay, there's a little bit more, but basically what he's saying is that even if you can't hold present day whites accountable for slavery, you can still hold these federal and state governments responsible for or liable for reparations, because they played an active role in preventing black people from recovering from slavery. They actively conspired to deny blacks opportunities, and this was systemic. These were Jim Crow laws, and these were racially discriminatory policies, which prevented black people from recovering from slavery. It is because of that that you can hold present day, I don't want to say white people, but the dominant society consented to the discrimination against black people, which prevented us from pulling ourselves from our bootstraps. The succeeding white generation caused the harm that entitles blacks to reparations. They did so by preventing the slaves and their descendants from recovering from the harms that slavery caused them. It is this injustice, the injustice of preventing the slaves and their descendants from recovering from the harms that slavery caused the slaves, not the injustice of slavery, that is the cause of harm that entitles the present black population to reparation. If I unjustly prevent someone from recovering from the harms others unjustly caused them, harms he would have otherwise recovered from, I am the unjust cause of his remaining in his harmful condition. In other words, I harm him as surely as those who harmed him first, and our positions differ only in when we harmed him. They harmed him first, and I harmed him later. So it's not just slavery, it's the Jim Crow, it's the systemic discrimination, it's the lack of opportunities. Um, Now the U.S. Supreme Court basically deemed affirmative action to be unconstitutional. So where are the reparations? Yeah, I actually was going to do a video response to that Netflix doc. I forget what it's called. That Netflix documentary about the Hebrew Israelites was absolutely terrible, but it was so long I couldn't even remember details of it. And I'm not going to watch it again. That was the worst documentary I've ever watched. Um, but I do have comments about his Hebrew Israelites. I think they got it completely wrong. But anyway, we're talking about slaves. And reparations. So here are my views. I think that to give Black people reparations in this, you know, state of America, in the state of society, is not really going to do much, because if you start giving out money, all Black people are going to do is buy Jordans and basically give it away to the dominant society anyway. What, the Black men are probably going. It's going to give them greater access to white women. This is anytime Black men have access to wealth, they do not pass it on to the Black community. They ended up giving it to the dominant society. Now, when you give wealth to Black women, the Black women do actually build from it. They do start businesses. They do pass it on to their children. So there is a divide between Black men and Black women. At the end of the day, and I know this may offend some people, but you can't have reparations and integration. If we're integrated into the dominant society, any wealth that the Black community is given will end up in the hands of the dominant society. We don't own anything, and we're not trying to build. So the only way reparations would make sense is if we were given sovereign territory, just like the Native Americans. If we were given some land where we could build and we could have our own, government, and be sovereign and not have interference from the dominant society, then reparations would make sense. You need to give us some land. You need to give some sovereignty, so that we can have the right to self-determination. But to give us money, to give us a blank check under the system of white supremacy is not going to do jack shit. Um, well, they love integration because they see it beneficial, right? They see that the way they see it is that they can benefit, right? They can basically move to the white neighborhoods. They can go to white institutions of education. Um, but at the end of the day, they're never going to have the right to self-determination, right? And then you have Black men trying to basically move up the social hierarchy by marrying white women and basically trying to disparage Black women. So they're going to produce biracial children, and then they're basically just going to whitewash the Black community. And then their children, they think that this is the path of liberation, that they're just going to whitewash the entire Black community. And then basically there won't be any races anymore. But at the end of the day, you still don't have the right to self-determination. Your livelihood is still going to be dependent upon other people. This is the reason why so many Black people can't even speak up when it comes to matters of public concern. They can't criticize the Israeli government. They can't express any support for Black Lives Matter or whatever, even though I think Black Lives Matter is complete bullshit. The bottom line is that you are still owned by somebody else. You don't have any ownership. These NFL players don't own the teams that they play for. They don't own the institutions of education. You're still dependent upon another society. So you can't have reparations with integration. That's my opinion on it. Um, and I'm not saying, a lot of people say it's racist. I'm promoting segregation. No, you don't necessarily need to segregate, but if you do want reparation, then I think segregation is completely necessary. But if you want integration, then reparations is a complete lost cause, like they did the Native Americans. Exactly. The Native Americans, a lot of them are getting wealth from these casinos, because you live in these conservative states where, like, I was in Oklahoma for a while. Gambling was illegal. Um, Alcohol was illegal. They had like this really watered down beer, which was only like 1%. It tasted like crap. And so the only way you could get some real alcohol and the only way you could gamble was to go on a Native American reservation. And so the casinos are all on the reservations. They're not in the state of Oklahoma. Okay, y'all. I'm going to post that link one more time to see if anybody wants to come up. Okay, y'all. So people have been asking me to talk about reparations, and I finally did it. Maybe this isn't the most entertaining way of doing it, but I'm trying to tell y'all the real deal, the real crux of the argument, and the obstacles that Black people are going to face trying to present a case for reparations. You need to make sure that when you're talking about reparations, that you're not talking about holding white people liable for something that they didn't do. We're not talking about holding white people liable. We're talking about holding the US and state governments liable for their hands in slavery, that they actively conspired to keep Black people enslaved and they actively profited from stolen labor. So they are they have a duty to compensate the descendants, the inheritance or the heir apparents of the descendants of slaves. Okay, I don't see anybody coming up. Um I guarantee after this video goes to YouTube, when it goes to replay, they're going to be saying, "Oh, I missed it. I wanted to say something." You know what? I'm busy. I did post this earlier so that everyone would know that I was doing this. During the week, I don't have time to do live streams. So this it's now or never. It's now or never. You can talk about it on somebody else's channel, but I guarantee that when other Black people talk about reparations, it's not coming from an intellectual standpoint. They're talking about bullshit. They're talking about emotions and how they feel about slavery and this gimme, gimme, gimme. They're not actually presenting why we are entitled to reparations. I just laid it out for you. I mean, this isn't my arguments. Um, I basically just used somebody else's arguments, but I did take out the relevant portions and I made it applicable to the current day situation. So I did contextualize it. I did give some legal background to say why. Basically, the case for reparations is going to be based on negligence. Again, the elements of negligence are a duty, breach, causation, and damages. Okay, y'all, I'm starting to run out of things to say. Nobody's coming up, so I'm pretty much going to have to end this live stream. Well, I the problem is that when I do talk about topics like these, I don't get that many views, and so I want to grow my channel. There are some Black people who have been successful talking about serious topics, but I don't think they have a primary Black audience. They have a mixed audience. You can't really talk about intellectual stuff within the Black community. They're not interested in it. They want constant entertainment. They're hedonistic. They want everything spoon fed and broken down to them like you're talking to a 5-year-old. I mean, where are the Black intellectuals? Yeah, I can make more money if I were to talk about celebrities and stuff. I at the end of the day, I think I'm going to have to expand my audience. I'm going to have to cater more to a white audience if this is the type of content that I want to do because Black people, unfortunately, are not interested in these topics. Um, and I know I'm not the most interesting content creator, but it is what it is. I'm going to give you the real deal. I'm going to do research and I'm going to actually give you some information that can actually benefit you in your life. So, okay, y'all, nobody is coming up. I'm going to go ahead and end this live stream. Let me try it one more time and post this link. No, there's only 2 people here. So the likelihood that somebody's actually going to come up is very slim. Somebody just came back in. There's the link. If anybody has anything to say about it, I'm about to end this live stream. Okay, y'all. So y'all have a good day. Hopefully people will go back and listen to this later. Thank you for your participation, especially AB the one, because I think without your commentary, I probably would not have anything to say other than what I was reading from that article.